Tom, what did you want to talk to me about?
Chair, the feed is now live.
Thank you, and good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Bolsover District Council Planning Committee. I'd like to welcome you all, and if you don't mind, I'm going to take you through one or two important aspects that we have to cover in the current situation. So first of all, it's a public meeting which is being streamed via YouTube to the council's website. The meeting is also being recorded for the purposes of the minutes. I have been advised, as you heard, that the live stream is now up and running. If for any reason the public can no longer hear or see the meeting over the live stream, we will need to adjourn until the connection has been re-established. Can I remind all members of the meeting etiquette that has been circulated and procedures that apply for remote attendees? All members, please, should have their microphones muted, but their cameras turned on. If you wish to speak on an item, please indicate by using the chat function or by raising your hand. I will then call on you at the appropriate point. I will ask the facilitator, Nikki, to advise me if there are any members who wish to speak that I have not spotted. So please be patient. There will be captioning throughout the meeting, and you may notice that your wish to speak has been acknowledged as it scrolls at the bottom of the screen. That way you can lower your hand and be assured that you will be called upon. Members are reminded you must remain on camera throughout the meeting and ensure, please, that you are alone in the room or wherever it is that you're operating from. So before we start, I would just like to confirm the members who are present and other people who are present here in the chamber, if I may. So I'll start with members present. Apart from myself, Councillor Tom Munro, Chair of Planning Committee. We also have Councillor Chris Kane, Vice Chair of Planning Committee, Councillor Deborah Watson, Councillor Duncan McGregor, Councillor Liz Smith. In addition, we also have officers, Sarah Kay, the Planning Manager, Chris Fridlington, the Assistant Director with responsibility for planning, Principal Planning Officer Peter Sorden, and in addition, we also have as you look to my left, but in reality on my right, Alison Bluff, who will be minuting the meeting on our behalf. So I'm now going to hand over to the facilitator to ask us who is attending remotely. Over to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. So joining us online today for the committee are Councillors Derek Adams, Alan Bailey, Anne Clark, Nick Clark, Paul Cooper, Maxine Dixon, Natalie Hoy, and Jen Wilson. We also have on the call Councillor Andrew Josby, who is attending as a ward member for South Normanton East. And we have two speakers also in the meeting room, which will be asked to speak by yourself, Chair, at the appropriate time. Jenny Owen is attending from the legal team. We have also supporting the meeting today, officers from planning and the governance team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. So without further ado, if I may, I'm going to move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. Have we, either Nikki or Alison, received any in advance?
I've not received any, Chair.
Thank you. Nikki, have you received any?
Yes, Chair. Councillor James Watson has offered his apologies.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other apologies from any other attendees at the meeting? Councillor Anne Clark.
Yes, Janet, as she still has not got her iPad, it hasn't been returned.
Is that Councillor Janet Tate?
Yes, no iPad, it hasn't been returned.
Thank you very much indeed. That's been noted. Thank you. Right, if we may move on then to item 2, which is urgent business. So I'm pleased to report that there is no urgent business for today's agenda. And so therefore we are able to move on with alacrity to item 3, declarations of interest. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest and or other interests not already on their register of interest in any item on the agenda and withdraw from the agenda at the appropriate time. So have we received any declarations in advance, first of all?
I've not received any, Chair.
Nicola, have you received any?
None received, Chair.
Right, are there any members who need to declare any declarations of interest on any item on the agenda? No, thank you very much indeed. If you are not sure at any stage, please do not hesitate to seek guidance. We do have legal officers present who will give guidance when necessary. Thank you. We'll now move on, if we may, to item 4, which is the minutes of our meeting, which was held on the 30th of September, which have been circulated and are pages 5 to 13 of your paperwork. Are we happy, first of all, that they are an accurate record?
Councillor McGregor, more accurate record.
Thank you. They've been moved by Councillor McGregor, and I believe they've been seconded by Councillor Derek Adams. Yes, is that all right, Councillor Adams? Yes, thank you. Could we indicate, first of all, I'll take a vote in the chamber. All those in favour, please indicate. That is 4 in the chamber out of 4, Nikki. You're 5, sorry, out of 5, Nikki. Right, all those who voting remotely, I'm going to invite Nikki to take the vote and record it. Nikki, over to you.
So members, if you would just indicate for, or if you raise your hands for the minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's all members voting remotely have voted for, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So we'll now move on to item 5, which is planning applications. So this is the main business of today's meeting. So as you can see, we have 2 applications, and we're going to consider them in the order that they appear on the agenda. So firstly, I'm going to invite the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers, and the public who are watching on YouTube how the application is going to be dealt with. So I'm now going to hand over to Alison Bluff, who will take you through the process. Thank you very much indeed. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications at the meeting. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. Then the Chair will ask each of the speakers, any ward members first, followed by objectors, then the applicant or their agent, to address the committee, first turning on their cameras and microphones. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to put forward their views. There will be a reminder given when 30 seconds remain. At the end of a speaker's 5 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. Where there are multiple speakers on an application, speakers are asked to refrain from repeating points previously made. When we have heard from all speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate by the committee and determination by a vote. Committee are reminded that motions which go against the officer recommendation must be supported by reasons. A note for the public: once the application you have come to hear has been dealt with, you may leave the meeting. If you choose to remain in the meeting on Zoom, you must keep your camera and microphone turned off. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. So let's move on then. So the first application we're going to consider today is application 20-00185, outline application for the erection of 48 dwellings and retention of the existing farmhouse with access and all other matters reserved, Town End Farm, Lees Lane, South Normanton. So now I'm going to call upon the planning manager, Sarah Kay, and ask her to give us her report. Over to you, Sarah, please.
Thank you, Chair. Nikki, could you put me the presentation on the screen, please? And if you can move to the next slide, please, as the introduction, slide 2. Thank you. So as Chair's just introduced, this is the application and the description of the application. Just for clarity of a point there, it is an outline application. We are considering the details of access as part of this application, and it's all the other matters that are reserved for later approval. So this is the site at Town End Farm, Lees Lane, South Normanton, and the applicant is EPC United Kingdom PLC. So we're now on slide 3. This is the site location plan. This is the slide that shows members the whereabouts the site is located and the red line boundary of the application site. It shows the context of the wider area as well. And I'll just give a few pointers as to whereabouts we are in terms of South Normanton. So the site's located to the southwest region of South Normanton Village. It's within the settlement framework. It's located off of Lees Lane with properties with markets that are fronting onto Market Street, immediately adjoining the application site to the east. There are properties that are centred around North Close that adjoin the southern boundary of the application site. To the north is the alignment of Lees Lane, and then slightly beyond that is the South Normanton Football Club and their playing fields that are located to the north beyond the application site boundary. And then out to the west, there are open fields located beyond the application site boundary as well. Can I move on to the next slide, please, Nikki? So this is an aerial image of the application site itself. This is an image that was taken from Google Earth. So just as a disclaimer, it's not always the most up-to-date aerial image that members we'll see. Obviously, we're reliant on how that is updated with Google. So one particular point to make with this one is that there are 3 buildings positioned on the northern half of this application site that have subsequently been demolished. But again, just pointing out some of the features of this particular aerial image for members. Again, just to identify the site itself. It's made up of 2 specific character areas. So you can see the northern half of the site is where the 3 buildings were located in this aerial image, but they've subsequently been demolished. And then the southern half of the site is the field to the south of those buildings, which is essentially just an open field, a grass paddock. Can I move on to the next slide, please, Nikki? Thank you. So as set out in the officer's report, the application is an outline planning application. It's submitted for residential development with all matters except access reserved for later approval. So what you see on the screen is an indicative site layout plan that accompanies the application submission. This actually shows the position and the design of the new access into the site itself. That's to be taken off of Lees Lane as a single entrance point into the site itself. And what you can see in terms of the indicative site layout plan is an indication how a development might be arranged with this particular site itself. This is showing a development of 48 dwellings, but members need to bear in mind, obviously, that this is an application submitted in outline. So we're not tied to those parameters of this particular layout or those number of properties. It's just something that's been submitted with the application. One feature that is of note is that the existing farmhouse building is to be retained as part of this application submission, and that's the building that's located in the top sort of right-hand corner of the application site. And that would be accompanied, facilitated by any site layout plan coming forward as part of a reserved matter submission. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So the next series of slides, and there are 8 of them, which I'll pass Nikki through shortly, are just various photographs that have been taken from the site itself, from various vantage points. And you'll see, obviously, the description of each slide shows whereabouts you stood in terms of the photograph position. So this one is taken from the northwest corner of the site. The next slide, please, Nikki. again, is just a further scroll around of the site, and what members are seeing on this particular image is that where the buildings were located on the aerial photograph, this is where those buildings have now been demolished. Can I see the next slide, please, Nikki? And this is now taken from sort of the northwestern corner or area of the site. Again, just looking back at where the buildings were positioned in that northern half of the application site boundary. And obviously the pile of rubble you can see is from the demolition works. Next slide, please, Nikki. So the next images are taken from the western boundary of the site and actually show that sort of the open grass paddock, which is the southern half of the application site. And these were photographs that were taken by the case officer, just showing the context of the surrounding area. So this one's looking from the western boundary of the site towards the east. And you could probably just see some roof, some properties and some roofscape in the particular photograph. That's looking towards the properties onto Market Street. Next slide, please, Nikki. And then slightly further around, you can see some more properties in this particular image. This is indicating the southern boundary of the application site, and these are the properties that are located on North Close, which immediately join the south boundary of the application site. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? And this is just a little bit further along again from the western boundary. So we're just sort of panning around in a clockwise direction, which is similar to what we did on the site visit presentation as well. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So these photographs are now back at the entrance point to the application. This is taken on Lees Lane itself, and I'm roughly stood in the location where the new site access would be positioned. Here I'm looking sort of towards the west, northwest, and these are the two properties opposite the site access point that are located onto Lees Lane. So this is where the new access would be formed. Next slide, please, Nikki. And again, just looking in the other direction. So I'm now stood a little bit further along Lees Lane, but I'm now looking in an east direction. And you can see there's actually a flag flying on a flag post in this image, which is part of the, that's actually the whereabouts the farmhouse is that's to be retained. So this is whereabouts the access would be coming onto Lees Lane. And it's just a reference point, so you can see the soft grass verge and some of the landscaping that would be removed in order to facilitate the access point into the site. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So this is just a slide that sets out the main considerations. So in terms of the officer report, I don't intend to go over the details of the officer report in full. But as I say, I've set out on here the main considerations that are set out in the application and the officer's report itself. In addition, the report also has proceeding sections that aren't detailed on this slide that set out planning policy background, site history, consultee responses, and representations that have been received as a result of the application being publicised and people invited to comment on the application submission. So in terms of the key points that are for consideration, it's noted to members that the site is allocated for residential development under the provisions of policies LC1 of the local plan. In terms of the site access, the proposals have been reviewed by the local highways authority, and the site access proposals are considered to be acceptable. A suitable access design has been proposed, and there's capacity in the local highway network for the scale and nature of development that is also being proposed as part of this application submission. So there are no outstanding highways issues in terms of this submission or the proposals. The site itself is not a special or distinct landscape area, and therefore, whilst it does include some open fields and some hedgerows, it's not considered that the site is specifically one that should be protected. And by virtue of the fact we have allocated it in the local plan, the view is that the site can be developed and the development can be put forward that will assimilate with its surroundings in appropriate measures. So the design layout of the scheme has been appraised as part of this particular application submission, but as a disclaimer to members, obviously we have the site layout drawing that is submitted, but we aren't giving too much weight to it because it's only an outline application with access being considered. So the urban design officer has offered some comments and some commentary on the scheme, which we would expect an applicant and a developer moving forward to take into account. But we are of the view that all of the matters that have been raised in terms of any particular design concerns can be dealt with through the usual channels of a reserved matters application and a reserved matters submission. So we believe that the site can be developed in an appropriate manner And as usual, that will be expected to address things like the supplementary planning document for housing layout and design, etc. So in terms of ecology and biodiversity, the site will result in the loss of some biodiversity. We accept that in terms of the allocation. That's to be expected. But as part of any reserve matters submission, we would expect to see both on-site and off-site biodiversity mitigation measures put forward. And they'll need to be secured to make sure that there is a net gain overall in terms of any development coming forward. And there is certainly scope within the application site and also off-site in terms of the applicant's landholding to secure these measures, and they are appropriate. So in terms of hedgerows, we'll seek to secure retention where we can, but obviously the site is a development site, so there will be some loss of trees and hedgerows on the site to facilitate that development. That's to be expected. But there will also be mitigation measures to target particular species such as barn owls and swallows that have been identified with the application submission. Looking at technical matters in terms of contamination and drainage, the development site is considered that it can put forward an appropriate drainage strategy and an appropriate site remediation strategy, and they will be dealt with through planning conditions and reserve matters details coming forward if the outline application was accepted today. Finally, in terms of recreation, leisure, education and health, appropriate policy compliant planning contributions are proposed to be secured through a Section 106 agreement, and they're commensurate with the scale and nature of the development that's being proposed. Matters of archaeological interest have been assessed by the officers in consultation with DCC Archaeology, and also the potential to secure local employment and skills opportunities if permission is granted. And again, this is dealt with. There are no archaeological interests that need to be taken forward. That's been considered, and planning conditions would address things in terms of securing local employment and skills moving forward. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So in terms of the overall considerations and the conclusion that is reached in terms of the officer's report, this is an allocated site that can, subject to appropriate reserve matters approval, be developed in accordance with the adopted policies of the local plan, subject to appropriate planning conditions and consideration of reserve matter submissions coming forward at a later date. We would limit the maximum number of dwellings permitted in terms of the submission detail we have, and the completion of a necessary Section 106 planning obligation as well. So the application is therefore recommended for approval, and that is set out on pages 30 to 37 of the agenda pack. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for your report. We're now going to invite speakers. We have two speakers today. As the clerk explained, they will each have 5 minutes to get over their points, and they will be informed by the one of the officers when they have 30 seconds remaining. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that you've been raised or they've raised, but remember your question should only relate to the points which they have already made. And I will obviously invite you once the speaker has finished if you have any questions. So our first speaker is Councillor Andrew Josbury, who is speaking as the ward member. Councillor Josbury, could you please confirm your name and that you understand the process?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Andrew Josbury, Bolsover District Councillor for South Normanton East and Parish Councillor for South Normanton. Okay, I do understand the process, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. You're now invited to speak, Andrew, on the application. Over to you.
Right, thank you. Right, there's several issues that I'm not happy about, and I understand the need for housing, and I've got no problem with building on this land as such. But there is specific issues, one being the access to the local infrastructure. Now, I'll address the access first. I've lived in South Normanton all my life. I know it like the back of my hand. And I absolutely feel that the access off Leaves Lane is too narrow and restrictive, particularly for the building work. It was rumoured, and it's a good rumour, that they could not get to demolish the buildings that you were showing in the slides because they couldn't get the lorries down there. They had to unload the lorries for the in the hub car park and bring the equipment down that way. The road is very narrow. It's got 5 houses that run at an angle to it that have no parking. They park on the corner. Now the Highways Agency have said that the vision is adequate, but they wouldn't swear to this because I've read what they said, and they said that it could only do it off of I suppose Google Earth, and the assessment would not be. They would not agree with the assessment, whatever that means. But it's too narrow. But there is an alternative. If I would be quite happy with it, if the road off of which is called Shiner's Way that goes past the hub was extended round the last bungalow, and Lees Lane be still a dead end. So there would be no access onto the estate from the off of Lees Lane. That's the alternative, the only alternative that I could see that would work. The other issues that I've got a problem with is the local infrastructure is not really up to more housing in South Normanton. I'll start with the GP surgery. There is a week to 2 weeks wait for an appointment in South Normanton, which is the same which was the same as when I was 16. I think things should have moved on by now. But they haven't. And the 106 money allocated to this is about £23,000. Now, that would build you a decent conservatory on back of your house. It's not what we really need with the size of South Normanton now is some better funding, so we can now actually have a health service, a health centre or something like that, actually in South Normanton. Something that's dedicated, something that's not part of the hub, or it could be part of the hub, but it could be extended into the hub on a bigger scale. Like, I don't think £23,000 is up to it. There's also the schools. Now, the schools are still the same now as they were when I was a kid. They've built a couple of extra classrooms, but then again, South Normanton's size has doubled since I was a kid. There's no more room for development of these particular junior schools and infant schools. So we really could do a new school as well. Right, and although they have got a model that they use to see whether there's enough places available or whatever, that's not living in the real world, really. If South Normanton is going to continue to be developed, we need something like a new school, like a primary school, a large primary school somewhere in the village to accommodate this. It's a big concern that classrooms are going overcrowded and the schools are going overcrowded, and I think for development to go ahead, this needs to be really addressed, and it needs the authorities to agree to this being upgraded, before the
30 seconds remaining.
Right, so I'm running out of time. There's other issues like the drainage. The flood risk people from Severn Trent said that it would be a last resort to approve this, which is a pumped system. Right. I dare say that there's going to be more development in the area, so bigger drains must be really installed. Right, I think I've run out of time. But I would be against it in principle, not against the building, but I'd be against approving this because of the things that I've raised.
Thank you, Councillor Josbury. Right. First of all, do members have any questions they wish to ask of Councillor Josbury? I've got one hand I've seen raised straight away. That's Councillor Derek Adams. So Councillor Derek Adams first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Derek Adams, Bolsover South. Andy, you mentioned another access. It's a long while since I've been on Lees Lane when my son used to play football. But I always remember it being narrow, so now I remember, if I remember rightly, the pavement only went so far. Which was the other access you just mentioned?
Right, it comes off of Market Street and it goes to the hub. there's the road actually goes around to facilitate the flats at the back of the hub, and if you took it straight on, instead of it going around to the flats, if you took it straight on, it would come out where the old barns have just been demolished, and took it around the very last bungalow on Lees Lane.
What's the name of the road? I've just pulled
It's
it.
Shiner's Way. Sorry, mate, it's Shiner's Way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so are there any other members, first of all, remotely, who wish to ask Councillor Josbury any questions? No?
No indications, Chair.
Are there any councillors in the chamber wishing to ask Councillor Josbury any further questions? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for your contribution, Councillor Josbury. I'm now going to move on. We were scheduled to have another objector, but unfortunately, sorry. So sorry, Councillor Parkin, you've just indicated. You've not got your microphone on, Councillor Parkin. We can't hear a word you're saying. You're still muted, Councillor Parkin.
Councillor Parkin, I'm just sending you a little prompt to ask you to unmute. Councillor Parkin, you should have something come up on your screen now to click.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
Councillor Parkin.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I've had difficulty this morning attending the meeting. I didn't get on till after you got to item 5. What I want you to record is that I declare an interest in this issue because I'm from South Numiton. We have discussed it between ourselves. So that's what I want you to put down in the records, please.
That will be noted, and you need to mute yourself and take no further part in the discussion or the vote. Okay?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay, so we'll move on then, if we may, to the second speaker, and our second speaker is Rebecca Booth, who's the agent for the developer. So, Rebecca Booth, could you please identify yourself?
Hello.
You've not got your camera on, Rebecca.
I think it's not recording. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
It says it's recording, but unfortunately it looks like it's frozen.
Okay. Are you aware of the, were able to hear the instructions that you will have 5 minutes, and that after 4, oh, we can see you now, Rebecca, and that after 4.5 minutes, one of the officers will advise you that your time is up?
Yes, I can confirm that, Chair.
So if you'd like to just introduce yourself to the meeting.
I'm Rebecca Booth and I'm from Leith Planning Group. We are the agent acting on behalf of BPC on this planning application.
Thank you very much indeed. You now have your 5 minutes. Over to you, Rebecca.
Chair and members of the committee, may I take this opportunity to thank you for allowing me to attend today's meeting and to set out the background and justification for the proposed development at Townend Farm. As set out within the officer's report, the applicants have sought to secure the development of this site in the right way by active engagement with your officers in the planning policy team as part of the evolution of the Bolsover local plan. In order to secure a residential allocation on the site, a number of matters had to be addressed, including demonstration that it was acceptable in terms of highways. We provided the local authority with everything they requested from us as part of the local plan process to the satisfaction of both your planning policy team and the planning inspector who examined the plan. In that regard, the site has already been deemed to be acceptable and appropriate for residential development, and at the scale of development subject of this application. The current application is therefore only seeking to secure consent for the site access arrangements, with all other matters to be reserved for future consideration. including the site layout, the number and design of the proposed dwellings, open space provision and landscaping. The applicant is aware of the comments received during the life of this application from the local community, and note that the majority of the concern is based on the impact on the highway network and on Lees Lane. In that regard, we would remind members that the principle of the development of this site has already been established by virtue of the local plan allocation, and the Highways Authority are supportive of the application, subject to the imposition of conditions and informatives on any grant of consent, as well as the provision of monies within the Section 106 agreement, to which we have raised no objection. Officers draw attention within their report to a number of comments from statutory consultees who have some outstanding queries on the design and layout of the proposed development. It is important to recognise that these issues are not for determination as part of this application, but will be addressed in full at reserved matter stage. I can confirm, however, that these comments have been noted, and any future planning application on the site will meet the tests laid out within the adopted development plan in terms of landscaping, space standards and design. As set out within the conclusion to the officer's report, this application is recommended for approval subject to a number of conditions, informatives and a Section 106 agreement. We can confirm that we are in agreement with all of the requests made in that regard, and the applicant is content to adhere to the financial obligations set out. In relation to the requested financial obligations, it can be confirmed that EPC already seek to support local community organisations, including a football club, and therefore have no objection to continue to support the residents of South Normanton as part of this grant of consent, with the proposed contributions towards leisure, health and highways. The applicant has also never questioned the required provision of affordable housing and is again happy to include such provision within the reserved matters application. In short, therefore, this is an application for 48 dwellings on a site allocated for residential use in your adopted local plan. The site is sustainably located and will help the local authority to meet their housing needs on a site that is available, deliverable and suitable for the proposed development. We would therefore kindly request that members uphold the recommendation of your officers and seek to support this application. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca. Do members, first of all, remotely, have any questions, please, for Rebecca on her presentation?
Councillor Nick Clark.
Councillor Nick Clark? Yes, Councillor Nick Clark. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Rebecca, thank you for your presentation. I know it's only an outline application, but could you advise what carbon reduction measures will be taking place on this development should today's application be successful, i.e. insulation of the buildings, etc. Also electric vehicle charging points, and also will it be development be sympathetic to wildlife, i.e. hedgehog highways and swift boxes, etc.
Councillor, thank you for your query. In terms of the carbon offset, obviously we'll be guided by the elements as it evolves as part of the reserved matters application, but the principles that you've discussed will feature as part of that application, I'm sure. It'll be negotiated as we deal with officers on the design and the layout and how that works and what we can do. In terms of ecology, as has already been stated by the officers, our client actually owns land adjacent to this site, and we're already discussing methods for potential off-site ecology mitigation. And obviously it's a sustainable location, it's right on the edge of South Normanton, so it's well placed for access to services and public transport.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Clark, don't forget to to mute yourself. Thank you. Are there any other councillors joining us remotely who wish to ask questions? No? Are there any councillors in the chamber wishing to ask the developer agent any questions? Thank you very much indeed. Okay, that concludes the speakers on this. We now have the opportunity to ask any questions, members, first of all, of the planning manager, where you are seeking perhaps further clarification on any points that are contained within the report or within her presentation. So are there any members for, and that at this stage I'm not asking for proposals, I'm just providing an opportunity to all members to ask any questions and seek further technical details. So the first hand I've got raised remotely, if I may deal with those first, because I know I've got at least one in the chamber, is Councillor Derek Adams. Councillor Adams, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, this pavement that isn't on Lees Lane, is there any plans in the reserve matters to reinstate the pavement there?
Thank you, Councillor Adams. So in terms of the indicative site layout drawing, obviously we are considering the access as part of this submission. And during the presentation for site visits, I did have a similar question asked, I think, by Councillor Clark. So on the side of Lees Lane, that is the application site, where the red line boundary goes up to the application site and the highway edge, there are footpaths indicated on both sides of the new access that is to be created into the site, where they can be provided along the site frontage, along to the extent of where the red line boundary and the red line edge of the application site is. But then people using those footpaths will then need to cross over onto Lees Lane to use the existing footpaths that are actually located on the northern edge of Lees Lane itself. So there will be connectivity and access to the footpaths provided as part of the access that is proposed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any other questions from members, first of all, remotely at this stage? No, thank you. Councillor McGregor in the chamber.
Thank you. Councillor McGregor, Elton Ward. To the officer, on the health facilities that's mentioned in there, could you give some background as to how these figures are arrived at? Because Councillor Joswood did mention, and then which I thought was a reasonable question, i.e. the 23,000, and it went on there about regarding the £480 per dwelling, because we don't obviously know whether the 48 will go on the building. I get that, but perhaps it would be good if you could explain how we get to these figures. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. So, yep, if we turn to page 29 of the agenda pack, that is where there's actually the details of the contribution. So I can possibly answer Councillor McGregor's question, and also there's a point out at that point there's also the answer to the education question that I think a member also raised. So in terms of the health contribution, we consult with the NHS, the local clinical commissioning group, and it is down to them to have a look at what is proposed in terms of the number of dwellings that's proposed on site. And they will use a formula to work out an average number of residents and people occupying each unit, and therefore the pressure that will then be placed on the local doctor's surgery. And they can make, using that formula, they will then account for whether there is actually going to be a shortfall. Can the doctor's surgery accommodate the additional pressures, or will there be some capacity issues that they will need to seek a contribution for? And that is detailed in this submission. That's exactly what they've done here. So they are saying that the development of 48 dwellings will mean that the local doctor's surgery will have a capacity issue that needs to be addressed. They can only seek a contribution that is commensurate with the development that's being proposed. So I know the councillor that spoke against the application said that there is a need for a new doctor's surgery in South Normanton. Now, we can't ask an application or a development to try and fix existing problems or to over-provide based on what is potentially needed in the local area. We can only ask for a contribution that's commensurate to the scale and nature of the development that's proposed. So in this particular submission, we've said that whilst the outline application suggests there'll be 48 dwellings, we won't know for definite with a reserve matter submission where it will be 48, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. So we're asking for a contribution that is per dwelling, set on what's defined by the reserve matters submission. And again, just to respond to the education point as well, we consult with Derbyshire County Council Education's team, and they've said that there is capacity in the local schools commensurate with this development. So we're not seeking an education contribution here.
Thank you, because a lot of I think that maybe some members are unsure as to how these calculations come about. That I understand it, but it's important that everybody else who may not know that they fully understand it. And of course, you've highlighted the fact that it may be 48, it may be less than 48, etc. But the figure that's mentioned there is the separate figures which you would be working on, no matter which development it would be. Thank you.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Deborah Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Deborah Watson. Councillor Jodesbury mentioned in his presentation about the narrowness of Lease Lane. I notice on page 19, the County Councillor, Jim Coyle, has also said he's totally opposed to the application due to the narrowness of Lease Lane. Can one of the officers please give me a bit more clarification on that, some guidance?
Sarah?
Thank you, Councillor Watson. So yeah, I think we do acknowledge that Lees Lane is a relatively narrow highway and a relatively narrow carriageway, but that doesn't prevent two vehicles from actually crossing and it operating as a perfectly safe and functional highway access point. So people do park on Lees Lane. I've been to the site myself, and there is some on-street parking that does prevent or does make it a single track at certain points. That's not unusual for a number of development sites across Bolsover and across the whole of the district. So it's about whether or not the carriageway is of a sufficient width to allow two vehicles to cross, which it is. The carriageway is sufficient width, in terms of creating the access safely into the site, so that's a sufficient dimension as well. And there are no concerns from the Local Highways Authority about how that will operate. So whilst we do accept it is narrow, and because of the alignment of the lane, it's a little bit awkward sometimes where parked cars are parked on the street in terms of on-street parking, but there's nothing to suggest that it won't operate in a safe manner, and we're to some degree in the hands of the Local Highways Authority in terms of their advice, but we are happy that it can operate in a safe way.
I'm just aware that one of the people who's joining us remotely has indicated they wish to speak, and that's Councillor Maxine Dixon. Maxine, I've seen you. I'll bring you in a minute. I've got another question in the chamber first. Okay, and I'll bring you in afterwards. Okay, if I don't, shout at me. Okay, so first of all, Councillor Liz Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Liz Smith, Old Hucknall Ward. On page, it's a bit following on from the access question, really. I notice on page 25 of our packs, there's this £5,000 that's been agreed to be paid by the applicant for something called a traffic management plan that'll go over a period of 5 years. I was wondering if you could just tell me a bit more about what that entails and what that might achieve or what it's for, please.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So, yep, the contribution is something that's come about as a result of the consultation with the Local Highways Authority. And the contribution is to allow them to actually monitor. So once the development, if we grant permission and the development actually takes place, the contribution and the sum would actually be to facilitate the Local Highways Authority to monitor any potential adverse impacts on the highway network as a result of the development. So it would allow them and facilitate them to actually have a look at if there is anything arising from the development proposals that has caused a problem. It allows them to undertake that monitoring and to keep an eye on the local junctions in that particular respect. How they might resolve that if there is an issue identified might be through a traffic regulation order to actually put some double yellow lines perhaps to prevent some parking around the access point. Again, that may potentially be controversial, so but that would go through the Highways Authority. But it's a commuted sum that would allow the Highways Authority to keep an eye on the local network, and then obviously they can be reactive to any particular issues that weren't foreseen in terms of the traffic modelling and the traffic assessment that's taken place. So that's what it's for.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Smith. If I can now bring in Councillor Maxine Dixon, please.
Oh, good morning, Chair. Thank you. My question's for Rebecca Booth, if that's okay.
Sorry, you need to speak up. We couldn't hear.
Okay, my question is for Rebecca Booth. Am I allowed to ask Rebecca?
No, you had your opportunity to ask Rebecca Booth questions when I opened the floor to members to ask Rebecca Booth questions. This section is really for asking the planning manager who presented the report any questions about the report. Now, you may well be able to ask the same question you wanted to ask Rebecca Booth of the planning manager. Planning manager might be able to assist you and give you some technical response.
All right, thank you. So, morning, Sarah. Thank you. If planning gives consent to this, is there a time scale that they have in which to start and finish the build? I'm just wondering how long the disruption on residents would be for.
You go on, son. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. So yes, if you want to turn to page 31 of the agenda pack, you will see the list of conditions that are recommended. And that actually sets out the timescales for the submission of the reserve matters detail, and then the timescales in which the development should then begin. So if I reference conditions 1 and 2, there is the condition 1 refers to the subsequent submission of details for the reserve matters we haven't considered, and those needing to be submitted to the local planning authority before any development commences. And then condition 2 is in respect of the timing of the reserve matters submission. So the developer would have 3 years from the date that any outline planning permission is granted to submit the reserve matters submission, and then they have 3 years from the date of that consent, or sorry, yep. So then they have a subsequent the timescales to actually begin to implement the consent is set out in condition 2. So that is, application for the approval of reserve matters shall be made to the local planning authority before the expiration of 3 years from the date of this permission. And the development to which this permission relates shall begin either before the expiration of 3 years from the date of this permission, or before the expiration of 2 years from the date of the approval of the last reserve matters, whichever is the later. So because it's a two-phase plan application process, it's not as clear-cut as it would normally be. They've got 3 years. It's dependent upon the timing sometimes of the reserve matters submission as well. In terms of completing the development, there isn't a timescale set on when the development has to be completed by, but generally, obviously, once the developer's on site, they wouldn't want to obviously prolong the amount of time in which it takes them to deliver the development. So will generally be in their hands, and I would probably forecast or expect maybe something along the timescale, maybe 18 months to 2.5 years, perhaps, for this particular scale of development, but nothing in particular in planning that can force the completion of development, I'm afraid.
Okay, Maxine, just by way of anecdotal evidence, Maxine, we did receive an application about 5 or 6 years ago for a housing development within the district in a small village of Hodthorpe and Belf, that on the day before the expiry of the 3 years, the reserve matters application came in, and I can report to you that a further 2 years down the line, they have now at long last started work on site. So please don't hold your breath. These things can roll on for a very long time. The important thing from your point of view is when they actually start on site, and that won't happen in advance of reserve matters being resolved. And then, as you can see in paragraph 2, it explains how long after that the process is allowed to go before work has to be undertaken. Okay, welcome to local government.
Thank you.
All right, are there any further questions to the planning officer on her report? Right, so now we move on to the final phase of the process, where in essence, I will open up to debate, just to remind you that if there are any motions, they have to be supported by reasons. If it's the officer's recommendation, then clearly the reasons are the ones that are in the report, and they are sufficient. If you wish to go against the recommendation, then obviously your reasons have to be specified. So now I'll open it up to debate. So anybody wishing to speak in debate on this, please indicate. And I have had an indication in the chamber from Councillor McGregor. Councillor McGregor first.
Thank you, Chair. The last few words that you said is really important for people to understand that process. The Councillor Josbury asked, he was not against the application, but he'd got concerns on 2 points, as far as I can remember. I covered one in my question on regarding the health, and I think that that's been accepted there, and it's tied in anyway with the conditions, etc. The highways, that's been talked about again by one of the members raised a question. And highways, I've concluded, there is no issues in terms of that. The £5,000 that was already mentioned by one of my colleagues, that also would help in terms of if they wish to do for the monitoring of Lees Lane. I draw members' attention to it because you're quite right. We have to make decisions on policies. That's what governs what we have to do. Main considerations, the officer in the officer's report on page 24, she gave 9 points in there, which I thought was quite clear and concise. It did explain, I'm sure, to everybody, that's what the considerations are on the application that is submitted. I've made some various notes, but just bear with me a minute. Yeah. On page 30 is the conclusion on it was on planning balance. There was a planning balance associated with this, but I think that is also been explained by the officer in regard, covered that point, I think, quite well. The policy on page 22 and 23. On page 23, you'll see on the bottom of page 22, policy, local plan for Bolsover district. And on page 23, on that first one, Chair, planning law requires the applications for planning permission be determined in accordance with saved policies in the adopted local plan, unless there's material considerations indicate otherwise. In this case, the most relevant local plan policies include, and I'm drawing members' attention to that. And there's 25 listed there. And below that, National Planning Policy Framework, which is really, really important because that's the government's dictate on that. And there is 12 paragraphs identified in there in respect of the framework. So my consideration is, Chair, and I am prepared to move at the appropriate time, I'll move a resolution at the appropriate time. I'll give notice.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor McGregor. Are there any other members either in the chamber or with us remotely who wish to make any points either for or against the application? No, they don't appear to be, so I'm going to return, if I may, to you, Councillor McGregor. And you said you wish to
thank you, Chair.
Move the recommendation as on page 30, I presume.
Yes.
I will, if I may, I'm going to read that out. The current application be approved, subject to prior entry into an S106 legal agreement containing the following planning obligations. I'm not going to read them all out, members, but they are therefore they are defined there. And then on the top of page 31, and subject to the following conditions that are given in draft form, the final wording to be agreed by the planning manager in consultation with chair and vice chair of planning committee. And then they are listed. So that's been moved by Councillor McGregor. Does that receive a seconder, please? Yes, that's been seconded by Councillor Liz Smith. We are now therefore going to, are there any further, sorry, my apologies. Are there any other further proposals? No, in that case, if I may, I'm going to move on and take a vote. I'm going to invite Nikki, first of all, to take a vote of those people joining us remotely. Nikki, over to you.
Thank you. With the chair's permission then, would members clearly indicate a vote for? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7 votes for, Chair.
Thank you.
Any against? That's.
Can I just remind Councillor Parkin that you're not allowed to take part in this vote? You've declared an interest. Right, sorry, Nick.
So that's 1 vote against.
Thank
Any
you very much.
abstention? Any abstentions? That's no abstentions. So that's 7
Thank
for
you.
with
So
0 abstentions.
in the chamber then, all those in favour, please indicate. That's unanimously 4 in the chamber. So the vote in total is 12 for and 1 against. Is that correct, Nikki? Oh, you see, my old skills as a maths teacher have not deserted me. Yeah, 5 and 7 for is 12. 12 for and 1 against. See, they've not deserted me, I promise you. There will be a maths later at lesson later for Councillor McGregor. All right, we'll move on, if we may, to the next item on the agenda, which is the second application, right? And moving on, I will just get to the right part. So it's got a nice long description. 19/4/0005, reserve matters, approval of reserve matters application for details of appearance, landscaping, layout and scale in relation to the development of 238 homes, open space and associated infrastructure, along with the discharge of conditions 6, phasing program, 8, framework travel, plan, 11, highway surfaces, water disposal, 15, maintenance management of public areas, and 16, hedgerow retention creation of the outline planning app permission reference at 14, 0080 outline TEA in respect of the areas of the site included in this application, land between Welbeck Road and Ostroff Lane, Bolsover. And I'm now going to invite the planning manager again to give a brief presentation showing any necessary photos or plans of the site and to tell us about any late comments and reports that have been produced. Okay, and I will, no doubt Sarah will ask for the presentation. And members, you'll get your chance to ask questions later in the meeting. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yep, that's just the introductory slide there on the presentation. So can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So, as introduced by the Chair of Committee, in terms of the application submission, he's detailed what the application is for. So the first slide I've got displayed on the screen is the site location plan. This identifies the location of the application site itself, and obviously the context of the wider area. Apologies, the lines are a little bit faint, but actually this site location plan does show the red line boundary of the application site, specific to this reserve matter submission, but then also in a very faint blue line, that's the extent of the outline application, which was granted previously as well, which the application also relates to. So the site's located to the north of Bolsover. It's located between Welbeck Road and Malpit Lane and Oxcroft Lane, and it's intersected by Elmton Lane, which runs pretty much through the centre of the outline submission, but along the western boundary of this reserve matters submission. There are properties which front onto Welbeck Road that adjoin the application site to the south, and then the complex of Farnsworth Farm is positioned to the northwest of the application site itself as well. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? This is an aerial image of the application site itself. Again, it's taken from Google Earth, but in terms of just identifying the application site in this image, you can see that there are 3 fields that particularly relate to the application submission. There are 2 slightly lighter green fields in the image you can see on the screen, and then immediately to the south of the lightest, smaller field is a green field, a darker green field. So in terms of the application site, it includes the dark green field to the south of the slightly lighter green field, the central lighter green field, and approximately half of the most northern lighter green field as well, in terms of identifying the extent of the reserve matter submission. Could I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So this is the application site layout plan that's been submitted with the application itself. This again was presented with the site visit presentation, but in addition to the site layout plan, if you can also jump, please, Nikki, to the next slide. This is a later iteration that came in as part of the reserved and the supplementary update drawing. So this is now a slightly more detailed drawing that's got obviously a little bit more colour and detail on it in terms of the landscaping. So it's probably a better site layout plan to talk around the details of the application proposals. So this is a reserve matters approval that's being sought for phase 1A of Bolsover North, which is a strategic housing site. And in terms of this submission, the applicant is submitting details for appearance, landscaping, layout and scale in relation to a development of 238 houses, various elements of open space and associated infrastructure as part of this particular submission. Details in respect of the main access and the means of access to the site, they've already been agreed as part of the outline submission. And this is just the first component part of that outline approval. And as the chair of committee detailed, there are also some details that have been submitted to discharge particular conditions of the outline planning permission as well, that are also detailed in the application submission that relate to conditions 6, 8, 11, 15, 16 and 19 of the outline consent. So the layout itself is made up of 2.5 storey and 3 storey dwellings. The application submission is actually a submission made on behalf of Strata Homes and Persimmon Homes. There are 2 developers being brought forward as part of this reserve matter submission. Strata will deliver the southern half of the site. So on this particular site layout drawing, you can see on the screen, there's a very central spine road that runs on a sort of an east-west axis, pretty much through the middle of the layout drawing. So Strata will deliver the homes to the south of that spine road, and Persimmon will deliver the homes to the north of that spine road. As has been mentioned, the application follows the outline planning permission that was granted under the reference number 14000080. That was agreed on the 25th of October 2017. And members of committee will probably be slightly familiar with this application because it was actually considered by planning committee in September 2019, where there was a resolution to approve the application for reserve matters. However, the applicant has subsequently come forward and sought some further amendments to the submission that were fairly significant in terms of the changes that were being sought, which is why we brought this back to planning committee for it to be reconsidered. The primary changes to the scheme relate to they're centred around the need to incorporate a much larger surface water retention basin within the application site and the layout that's being proposed. And members can see that is actually positioned at the northern point of the application site boundary, and you can see the sort of the darker green basin, which is shown on the drawing that's on the screen as well. So in terms of the presentation, I've got the next 5 slides are just photographs of the site from various vantage points. So can I ask Nikki please for the next slide? This is an image taken from Welbeck Gardens, and it's looking to the west and northwest of the application site across the fields. The next slide please, Nikki. Is still stood in Welbeck Gardens, but now you're looking in a western and a northwesterly direction across the fields that are pointed out on the aerial image. Next slide, please, Nikki. This is a photograph taken from Elmton Lane. This is the track that I said intersected the whole of the Bolsover North strategic site, but actually runs up the western edge of the reserve matters application site boundary. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? And then this is photographs essentially looking back now to the east. So we walked up a little bit further up of Elmton Lane and we're looking back over the fields and actually beyond to Welbeck Gardens where the previous 2 photographs were taken. And the next slide, please, Nikki. Again, is just again stood on Elmton Lane here, looking where the main feature drainage basin will actually be located and where it's likely to cross Elmton Lane to then connect to the next basin, which is in the field to the west of this lane and this alignment. Can I have the next slide, please, Nikki? So again, just as with the previous item, I don't intend to go over the officer's report in any sort of detail, but what I do want to set out are obviously the main considerations of the application as they're ordered in the officer report. They're set out on the slide that's now being displayed to members. And as mentioned previously, there are sections set out in the officer report as well that refer to planning policy background, site history, and then full details of the consultee responses and the representations that we've received as part of the application and the publicity that the application's gone through. So members have also been issued with an update report this morning, which includes some additional information about the details that have been clarified since the publication of the officer report and the committee agenda. This sets out the series of additional plans that have been received, which the applicant's been working on with the case officer to resolve particular outstanding matters, and the landscape drawing that I've displayed in committee today is one of those updated drawings. They relate to sort of minor matters of to do with layout and design and further consultation with the Highways Authority and the Environmental Health team. Now, members will see from the update report that there are still some slight technical matters that are still outstanding in terms of resolution with the Highways Authority and the Environmental Health team. But we're not considering that prevents committee from making a decision on the application today, because they're just relating to small technical matters. So we are asking for members to go ahead and proceed with considering the application today. So in terms of then just looking back at the main considerations, the principal development is established by the granting of the outline planning permission and the fact that the site is a strategic allocation in the local plan under policy SS4. Turning to layout and design, there is full consideration of the proposed site layout that are set out on pages 50 to 52 of the officer's report. That's been undertaken in consultation with the urban design officer, having regard to the principles of the supplementary planning document, housing layout and design, and the parameters of the outline permission and the design access statement that was submitted with the outline consent as well. In terms of all these matters, the layout presented is considered to be acceptable, subject to some minor sort of tweaks in terms of highways comments, etc., but nothing that will fundamentally change what is presented to members today. In respect of landscaping and ecology, the latest site layout sets out the proposals for a detail of hedgerow retention and biodiversity enhancements around the new drainage basins. I understand that the September 2019 Planning Committee, there were some concerns about the retention of particular hedgerows and things, and that the applicant has worked with the officer to make sure that those concerns of members have now been addressed. And we've been working with Derbyshire Wildlife Trust to in terms of looking at biodiversity and ecology impacts. So the hedgerows to the south and west and the southeastern frontage are now retained as part of the layout submissions that are detailed. And we're recommending that, subject to conditions of the outline permission, the scheme is acceptable in terms of its impact on landscape and ecology. In terms of highway safety, we're liaising with the Highways Authority on the submission detail, but in general, the layout of the scheme and the access and parking standards and parking requirements are all deemed to be acceptable. There are conditions of the outline permission that continue to address any outstanding highways matters that will need subsequent approval. And members will be familiar with the need for Section 278 agreements and Section 38 agreements in terms of highway adoption that will be progressed with the local highways authority, and the developer is likely to proceed through those as part of this submission as well. In terms of flood risk and drainage, the main change to the scheme was triggered by the need to incorporate a much larger surface water retention basin, but the drainage consultees have all agreed in principle with the details that have been submitted. And there are, again, conditions on the outline plan of permission that will continue to manage the approval of the exact detail of those drainage, that drainage strategy, as and when certain phases of the development come forward. Finally, in respect of noise, there will be some need to mitigate potential noise coming from Farnsworth Farm, which is located to the northwest of the site. We've been in consultation with the environmental protection team about the necessary mitigation measures that might arise from any potential noise impact from that noise environment. It's likely to include things like enhanced glazing and ventilation, but that doesn't prevent members from considering the details of the application or the layout that's been submitted today. It's just likely to be more detail in terms of that we need to get final agreement with the environmental protection officers on. So again, we're asking for committee to continue to determine the application in that respect. Principal development of the site, again, is established, as I've said, by the local plan allocation and the granting of outline plan permission. Reserve matters are considered to accord with the parameters of the outline plan permission and design access statements that have been approved, and that any amendments that have been submitted. And the details of these particular submissions are considered to address the matters that were raised by the earlier planning committee resolution in September 2019. So members will see that we're recommending approval as set out on pages 56 to 62 of the agenda pack. You will see that includes delegation to myself, the planning manager, in consultation with the chair and vice chair, to agree the final details of conditions and to agree the finer details of the outstanding comments that are to be made by the Highways team and the Environmental Protection Officer as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Right, we now move on to a speaker who's going to speak for the application. And I'd like to welcome Paul Butler. So if he's available, if he'd like to make himself known. Good morning, Paul.
Morning.
Would you like to just confirm who you are and who you represent?
So my name's Paul Butler. I'm the agent working on the application on behalf of Strata Homes and Persimmon Homes.
Thank you very much indeed. You understand you have a total of 5 minutes in which to present your case, and that after 4 minutes 30 seconds, if you're still going, then you will be reminded that you have 30 seconds left. So over to you, Paul, and welcome.
No, thank you very much. Thank you all for letting me speak today, and thank you for the officer's presentation just now. I won't need the full 5 minutes. I'll just pick up on some key further points, and obviously very welcome any questions you guys have. So the site benefits from outline plan permission and is allocated within the adopted local plan. This reserved matters application is one that you've previously seen before last year, and at that time it was supported by officers and was supported by the members as well. In the time since then, we've been required to amend the scheme to increase surface water storage infrastructure, which is needed to serve this phase of the development, which obviously specifically relates to the surface water drainage basin on the northern edge. This basin provides a benefit though, because it'll be landscaped. It can provide biodiversity benefits, and it'll be visually attractive. It will include new footpaths located around the whole edge of it, and it will therefore increase the amount of public open space within this early phase of the development. The other previously proposed green spaces on the site's boundaries with Elton Lane, Malpit Lane and Welbeck Road will also be retained, as will the existing hedgerows on the site's boundaries as well. So there's a real enhancement here in terms of green spaces and biodiversity. It's a positive change to the scheme that hopefully we think you'll hope to support. All the other key design features that we previously discussed and as part of the previously approved scheme have been retained, and that refers to those design uplifts that we've talked about previously, and we had a presentation on about a year ago, which includes materials, boundary treatments and landscape planting. The proposed homes will be built from brick and stone. They'll have stone walling and railings will be delivered in key character areas of the site, and the scheme will deliver a substantial level of tree planting, particularly along the future link road. So trying to really sort of encapsulate the character of the area, but also provide a statement in this key phase of the overall development. We've also retained and increased separation distances between existing and proposed homes to ensure the amenity of neighbouring residents is fully protected, and that's on the north-east corner and the southern area of the site. With specific regards to the two key issues raised at the last committee, we can confirm that the hedge adjacent to the existing properties on that southern edge will be retained, and we work quite closely with our officers to ensure that was the case. And all properties will also be provided with an electric charging point as previously requested too. As has been noted in terms of the noise and the noise issue on the highway side of things, well, we've provided that further information that's been requested, which again reflects the previous parameters that were considered acceptable. So we don't expect there to be any issues here. So the approval of the application today will kickstart the delivery of the significant benefits that this scheme and the wider Bolsover North scheme can provide to the town and district. This initial phase is for 238 homes. It provides opportunities for first-time buyers, couples of all ages and families. By following the recommendation of your officers today, we'd hope to be on site in the next year. So you'll really look to kickstart and facilitate the delivery of this important scheme for the area. This first phase alone will give a boost of approximately 250 direct and indirect jobs in the area and expenditure of over £5 million per annum from households to local services and facilities, hopefully after the 2nd of December, at a time obviously when we need it the most. It'll also act as a catalyst to accelerate the delivery of the wider social, economic and environmental benefits that the Bolsover North scheme can provide over the next decade. We therefore respectfully request that members follow your officer's recommendation and approve our application today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, for your presentation. I'm now going to invite members, first of all, members joining us remotely, if they have any questions. And the first hand raised is Councillor Derek Adams. Councillor Adams, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. Derek Adams, Bolsover South. What did concern me when I looked at the plan was the Sarah referred to it as the spine road between east and west. It looks like it could be used as a shortcut to go down Elton Lane, which concerns me if a vehicle's going to do that. Can we have some reassurances that will not be happening?
No, yeah, I can assure you of that. I think that the detail will be there in terms of providing something that segregates the two. This the spine road obviously something that moves on to the later phase of the scheme and comes around to the town centre. But yeah, the connections on the plan, on the landscape plan, you'll see that we've got varying 3-metre strips that go east to west, and they're for cycle and footpath connections that go into Humpton Lane. So Humpton Lane's going to be, I don't know, we'll call it a cycle and pedestrian highway more so than anything else. But yeah, we can look to provide some sort of control mechanisms to ensure that no one goes down there on any motorised type vehicle.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Are there any other questions from anybody joining us remotely? Councillor Nick Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. The same question as I asked at the previous presentation about carbon reduction measures. We already know you're doing the electric vehicle charging points. That's already been agreed at the previous last year's meeting. But again, will you be introducing carbon reduction measures, i.e. insulation in the building, and also regarding the ecology, will it be sympathetic to wildlife, hedgehog highways, etc.?
Yes to both questions, be a bit more detailed in terms of we're governed by the outline permission and by building regulations, but in terms of the carbon improvements we make, but obviously they include enhancements to the built fabric and insulation, so those carbon savings are there. Obviously, one important factor we've got now, this time I'm speaking to rather than last time, is the electric vehicle charging points as well to all dwellings, so that's a definite improvement to the last proposals from this respect. In terms of biodiversity and the hedgehog highways, that is something that we can look to do on the scheme adjacent to the hedgerows, and also where property's back on to hedgerows as well. So that's something we can look to include.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Clark. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Are there any other? Councillor Anne Clark.
As regards to the hedgerows, can you confirm that there will be no netting of those hedgerows?
No netting of the hedgerows? Sorry.
Yes.
Is that in terms of when the netting normally occurs in bird nesting season times, if any removal takes place then? So I think there's a condition attached to the landscape, to the outline approval basically, that talks about measures we need to take so we protect hedgerows when development's taking place in perpetuity. So that information will be provided in due course, and it'll be submitted to the council, and your officers can review, and the wildlife officers can review as well, and ensure that they're happy before anything can take place. So those protective measures are there for us in due course to make sure we hit them.
Because obviously if the hedgerows are being retained, there's no need for them to be netted in the first place.
No, I appreciate that, and I've seen it on a few sites actually where that issue has arose, and I think that the key thing is that rather than a blanket approach to the whole site in terms of protective measures while construction is taking place, we can work with officers and the technical and ecological officers to ensure that any measures that are provided are appropriate for this site and these hedgerows.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Clark, Anne Clark, just so you know, if you wish to ask the planning manager a similar question, she may well be able to throw further light on the technical side of that if you need to have further information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors remotely with any other questions to Paul Butler? Right. Are there anybody in the chamber with questions for Paul Butler? Yes. Councillor Liz Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's Councillor Liz Smith, Old Hucknall Ward. Now, I'm sure you're aware from our previous meetings, we're very keen on that this should be very high quality, very good in design. You briefly mentioned design uplifts in your speech a moment ago. I was wondering if you could just give me a little bit more detail about exactly what you're planning. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. Yeah, it's something we've worked really closely on with your planning and design officers, in particular Phil Smith to identify key plots and key locations where this enhancement is required to really give that feeling, this more of a wow factor and a statement factor as you enter the scheme of this first part of the wider proposals. That includes natural stone walling along the frontage of the sites and along the frontage of the open space off Mile Pit Lane. It's an arc. The open space is the sort of the green space right at the frontage of the site. Along the main spire road and into key plots within the site, we'll have natural stone and art stone facing buildings that will give you that sort of that statement features there. So that'll be, I say it's so it's a stone art stone we call it, but it's made from natural stone. But it's so that'll be on sort of key corner turning plots and features. We'll also look to provide a render in certain locations to give distinct character and feels to certain parts of those individual parcels, particularly along squares as you enter the site and sort of key focal nodes within each of the parcels from there. In addition to that, we'll also have low-level, high-quality estate railings, the design of which and colour of which has been worked with the council again to give that feel of continuity of character on both parcels, given we've got two developers really. And then the other side of that is including additional front of plot hedgerows and more additional landscape tree planting as well. So to try and really maximise those areas where we can provide landscaping to give a green feel too. So hopefully all those parameters fit together and provide a character that again sets a great tone for the wider scheme coming forward.
Thank you. And also, we heard you say that you'll be building within a year. Can we hold you to that?
Built by building, yes. The current proposal is to get on site next year, and hopefully you'll see some houses by the middle to end of next year from there. But that's the proposals, and we've been in discussions with your officers in terms of what our programme is beyond that as well, which is hopefully around about 70 homes a year. So yeah, so like a bit of a juggernaut, so to speak. Hopefully, following today, we can get on site next year and things can start moving quite nicely from there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I don't think anybody else at the moment wishes to ask any further questions. Can I thank you for your presentation and your response to the questions? And I like the concept of a juggernaut.
Very sympathetic term, isn't it?
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, members, that's the we only had the one speaker on this particular planning application. So now, members, it's your opportunity, as we did with the last one, to ask any technical questions or any questions seeking further clarification from the planning manager on her report. So are there any people joining us virtually who wish to ask questions, please? I can't see any hands. Oh, Councillor Clark. Oh, first I'll take Councillor Nick Clark. He beat you to it, Anne. Sorry.
I think she's going to ask, anyway, I was going to ask on her behalf. I'll let Anne go ahead.
Okay, that's very, very magnanimous of you. You won't get an extra portion of mashed potato, you know. Right, Councillor Anne Clark.
Basically, it was regarding the netting of the hedgerows. So I'm assuming that's what he was going to ask the question about, whether this would be included in the conditions.
Okay.
As obviously, if the hedgerows are to be retained, then there is no requirement for them to be netted.
Okay, I'll ask Sarah to clarify. Sarah.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. So yeah, we did cover this, I think, at the site visit presentation as well as a question, but yeah, for the benefit of members that weren't on that particular meeting. So yeah, the netting of hedgerows and the netting of trees generally happen at the start of the nesting season, obviously because nesting birds are protected throughout the whole of the nesting season. So developers tend to undertake this sort of practice because they are obviously they want to discourage nesting birds and that prevent causing an issue in terms of construction on sites. And also sometimes if hedgerows are earmarked for removal and the developer can't do that before the nesting season starts, again, they tend to undertake this practice of netting, and it can be quite a controversial thing, as I understand in terms of what sort of happened over the previous years. The outline planning permission and the construction activity of the site needs to be undertaken in accordance with the outline consent and the conditions that are already imposed. So the agent did obviously already allude to this, but in terms of protection measures for the hedgerow and protection measures for ecology as part of construction activities. They will be agreed as part of the outline conditions. So whilst they're not fully detailed as part of the submission now, that's something we will get to comment on at a later date. The slightly controversial issue is that actually the practice of netting hedgerows is perhaps not regarded to be development in its own right. So it's a very bit of a grey area, I would comment, in terms of planning actually being able to control whether or not that is regarded to be development. And actually whether we can prevent that practice taking place. But we will take advice from Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and obviously work very positively with the applicant as well to make sure that any measures that are put forward are appropriate. And obviously in this instance where we are looking to retain the hedgerows, we're trying to obviously avoid that practice wherever possible.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Are there any further questions to the planning officers at all? Yes, Councillor Nick Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, on page 47 of the report, regarding highway safety, one of the, this is when I think it was from representations that came from members of the public, there's a comment about fumes from vehicles due to the increased traffic which will emanate from the estate. Have we carried out an air quality assessment, or will one be carried out?
Thank you, Councillor Clark. So I do actually have the planning case officer with me as well, who dealt with the original outline consent. So I would have imagined that this will be dealt with actually at the outline consent. But Pete, can you answer that one for me, please?
Yeah, Pete Sorden, Principal Planning Officer. Yeah, obviously at the outline application stage, we consulted with the environmental protection officers who advise us on air quality. I must admit, I can't remember the exact detail of that because it's some years ago, but obviously in approving the outline planning permission, the principle of this number of dwellings has already been established and the issue of air quality has been resolved at that stage.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Is there anybody else joining us remotely wishing to ask a question? Yes, Councillor Natalie Hoy. Good morning, Councillor Hoy, and welcome. And please turn your mic on. Yes.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you. This is Councillor Natalie Hoy from Clough. It's just really about broadband. We've had issues on sites in Clough where we don't have fibre broadband. Obviously, we're living in a very different world at the moment where we're relying heavily on technology. Will fibre broadband be on these sites?
Sarah?
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. So yeah, it's again one that tends to be not necessarily covered by planning, but is something that's referred to and raised by Derbyshire County Council in terms of their response. Now, I am aware that there is an initiative called Digital Derbyshire that is actually administered by Derbyshire County Council, whereby new development proposals can actually register through that initiative. And I think it's run through BT OpenReach to actually ensure that new developments do have the necessary broadband connections. And it's quite heavily funded, I believe. So I would certainly be encouraging the developer to register this particular site if they haven't already. But I think it's incredibly well publicised. So I'll be surprised if they aren't already sort of registered with that particular initiative. But as is general, most developers now know that people do have a requirement and a demand for high-speed broadband, and in particular fibre optic broadband as well. So it's also covered in some respects by building regulations as well. So I would expect to see that as part of this development proposal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hoy. Anybody else joining us remotely? No? Are there any questions then, please, in the chamber to the officer? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So we move on finally to the last section, or last part of the process, which is, it's now open, the floor is now open for debate. So would anybody wish to care to make any points, either in the chamber or remotely? So I've had an indication in the chamber from Councillor Duncan McGregor. Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. In many ways, it's not unsimilar, this one to the last one. It's all to do with conditions, basically. I'll just draw members' attention to the fact on page 56, which the officer already said it, The principle of development on this site is already established through the strategic local plan allocation and the previous grant of outline planning permission. So basically, we're just dealing with conditions there. And I must say that I think the department's done really well when I've looked at all these conditions that's here, and I must commend the officers in their discussions with the developers to get these in place. And I think they absolutely support all of what they have done in there. In respect of the nesting of birds that's been raised, the law is quite clear on birds that's nesting, and there are severe penalties for anybody that does break that. So I hope that just gives a little bit of comfort to my colleagues who's raised about the birds, and I'm sure other members would be concerned if this was not taken into account by any developer. On the statement of decision process on page 60, in compliance with the National Planning Policy Framework, the Council has negotiated amendments, including partial withdrawal of elements of the original submission, and sought additional submissions in respect of site layout, highway safety, archaeology, flood risk, ecology, ground and noise, in order to seek compliance with the outline planning permission policies of the adopted local plan for Bolsover and the NPPF. And I think that paragraph says it a lot. And I would give notice of motion to move the recommendation at your particular, when you'd allow me, to move the recommendation on page 56.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Are there any other members wishing to make any points, please? Yes, Councillor Nick Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some reservations concerning this application at the moment, insofar as we haven't got all the information available to us to make an informed decision. Now, this development is a very large development, and the initial phase and the ongoing development of over plus 900 houses. And the SUDS amendment will, I think, have an impact on further phases, on phase 5 at least. But I propose that we should defer this application until all the information has been received by the officers, and then we can come back to this and to make an informed decision at that point.
Thank you. So are you making that as a formal proposal?
Yes, please, Chair.
Okay. I've already had one proposal moved. I'm going to first of all, just to get this technically correct, I'm going to first of all ask if the original proposal receives a seconder. The original proposal has been seconded in the chamber by Councillor Deborah Watson. So we now have a proposed amendment, and that's been proposed by Councillor Nick Clark. Would you just like to repeat your proposed amendment, Councillor Clark, just so it's clear to everybody before I ask whether or not there is a seconder?
Yes, certainly I will. I propose this agenda item be deferred until all the relevant information is available to members of the Planning Committee. Members of the Planning Committee will not have had time to digest all the contents of the supplementary report, which was only published late yesterday. There are several late submissions and now some very important details which are still not available to the committee. In view of this, I believe the application should be deferred until such time all the information is available to make an informed decision.
Right. Does that receive a seconder, the amendment? Does the amendment receive a seconder? Yes, that's been seconded by Councillor Anne Clark. Okay. We are still at the debate stage. We have a proposal. We have an amendment proposed. So we are still in the debate phase. Having seconded the amendment, first of all, Councillor Anne Clark, do you wish to speak to it? Can't hear you, you're still muted. You're still muted.
Yeah, several people actually didn't get the change that came through yesterday. Several people still not have got their iPads, so they won't have even had chance to, even if they're taking part in the meeting, they won't have had chance to inwardly digest the information that was sent out. And I think it's important that we have access to all the information before we actually can make an informed choice. Otherwise, we're making a decision on something that we don't know.
Thank you, Councillor and Clark. Right. Are there any other people wishing to speak either for the amendment or for the substantive motion? Nope. Right. In that case, we, as a matter of process, we need to, first of all, take the amendment, right, and ask for a vote on the amendment. And I'm going to take a vote across both remotely because I can see all the participants. I'm pretty sure I can. Yes. And I'm going to take a vote myself and do the count. Right. So all those in favour of the amendment, please indicate. I'm going to just count those on my screen first, and then I'll ask in the chamber. All those in favour of the amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. All those in favour of the amendment in the chamber? None. So that's 4 in favour. All those against the amendment, please, virtually, please indicate. That's 4 remotely. All, just show again remotely. Thank you. Fine. And then in the chamber, all those against the amendment, that's 5. So the amendment is lost. Do I need to request, were there any abstentions? No, there weren't. Okay. So now I will move on to the substantive motion, which is to accept the officer's recommendations, which includes, you will also see the fact that it is to be after further consultation with the chair and vice chair of planning committee. Just like to point that out, that is part of the substantive motion. So all those in favour remotely of the substantive motion, which is the officer's recommendation, virtually first, please. That's 5 in the chamber. That's 10 in favour. All those against, please show. That's 1. Are there any abstentions, please? 1, 2, and 2 abstentions. So the recommendation has been accepted. So that concludes the planning applications on this agenda. We now move on, if we may, to item, need to remember the number, item 7, which is the update on section 106 agreements. And I'm going to invite the planning manager to present the report, please. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. There is a slide also on the presentation, please, Nikki, as well, just an information slide. It's slide number 29, if that helps.
Oh, don't slow things down.
That's the one, thank you. So this report's been prepared as a component of the Council's procedures for recording and monitoring Section 106 obligations. The last report was presented to Planning Committee on the 8th of January 2020. However, unfortunately, due to COVID-19 and lockdown, we've not been able to meet the required quarterly updating schedule that the procedures actually require. So this is the first report that's been brought before Planning Committee since January. But we do intend to return to the usual quarterly reporting schedule, obviously subject to any further interruptions to council business or the planning committee meeting schedule, not facilitating that in particular. So we'll just obviously be reactive to what happens in the future, obviously with the forthcoming lockdown, etc. So this report, I'll be very brief in terms of what it sets out, but it's currently showing that we're holding approximately 1.5 million in Section 106 monies. That's from developments that have been approved and have already commenced across the district itself. The report is an information only report, so I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but I think just to draw to members' attention, paragraph 1.5 in particular, that one does set out the most pressing issues that members should be aware of. And in regard to paragraph 1.5, there are some instances where we have Section 106 monies that have been underspent. And because of timescales and triggers for those monies being returned to developers, there is an instance here where we are actually required to return some monies to one of the developers for a particular site, and that is the Brambles at Doe-Lee. And also in that particular paragraph, there's reference to some contributions that are getting very close to their trigger date to need to be paid back as well. And that relates to Woodside Stables at Rotherham Road. So in terms of the Brambles at Doe-Lee, I do accept it is unfortunate that we've got an element of underspend, but because of the terms of the obligation, we are required to contact the developer and ask them if they want the monies returning to them. So we have already approached them about this, but we're actually struggling to get the developers to come back to us to say they want the money returning. So we're pursuing it as we should do, but we've not actually heard back from Gleason's to say whether or not they want the money returning or not. But just as a little bit of background, I've been liaising with the arts officer this week about this particular issue, and the public art contribution for the Brambles at Doe-Lee did actually amount to £132,000 worth of public artwork monies. So in terms of the amount that we have got to pay back, the underspend of just over £4,000 obviously isn't the substantial amount of money. We have actually secured some public art as a result of the Brambles at Doe-Lee. I believe there was a public video that was procured in respect of the history of Doe-Lee that was part of that public art funding. And also there is a piece of public art on the grass verge that has also been provided as part of that scheme. So again, just acknowledging it's unfortunate there has been an underspend, but the majority of the monies have actually delivered public artwork in accordance with that requirement. In terms of the Rotherham Road scheme, again, I've been speaking to the arts officer and the leisure officer this week about that. And I think we're probably going to be in a position where we don't have to pay those monies back because some progress has been made. I'm told that in terms of the public artwork that is reported in paragraph 1.5, that money in paragraph 1.5 line B, that's actually going to be used to secure some fencing and gates at Villa Park. And the money is going to actually be used to secure the deposit for commissioning that work to take place. And in terms of the outdoor sports, I've been advised by the leisure officer that we have actually now committed to spending £32,277 of that money to provide a multi-user games area, a mugger, on the Clune Street Recreation Ground. And that work actually did commence this week. So a substantial amount of that spend has already been committed. There will be, I think, £4,395 and a little bit more left over. But again, I'll be liaising with the leisure officer to make sure that we're not in a position where we've got underspend that we've got to return. So we'll look to see how we spend that extra £4,000 with that particular one as well. So again, in terms of the other elements of the report, they will subsequently start to feed into future updates as and when the trigger dates get closer. And as and when projects are starting to be delivered on site as well. So we'll keep members informed of those that form the remaining component parts of the report itself. But yeah, again, just slightly unfortunate where we are with the Brambles, acknowledging that obviously, I guess if we'd been in a position where we were reporting on a quarterly basis, we'd have been perhaps a little bit more on top of this. But unfortunately, because of COVID and things, we've not been able to work and be quite as proactive with this particular one as we are. So yeah, that's just the update for members. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Do members have any questions, please, to the report? Yes, Councillor Derek Adams first.
Yes, Chair, thank you very much. I remember asking last January about having a traffic light system of a bar chart or something like that to warn us when these Section 106 monies were coming close to being returned. I wonder if that's still possible for us to have that type of thing.
Sarah?
It is. If you look at Appendix 1 of the report that's been presented, you'll see that there is a colour coordination in terms of the spreadsheet that's been presented, and that does start to show where we've got some of those contributions coming close to. So It's the oh gosh, there's no column numbers, but you can see it says there's a column in the appendix that says use by, and we've got red and amber for those ones that are coming fairly close. We've not used green, but again, I can just ask the officer to amend those. So yeah, we do have that traffic light system in place.
Would it be possible to have it more frequent?
We're committed to a quarterly reporting schedule. So again, happy to take any feedback from members as to whether or not that is an appropriate reporting process. But I think quarterly allows us to actually meet with the finance team, the leisure officer, and the arts officer on a more frequent basis, and then obviously, like I say, commit to the quarterly reporting back to planning committee.
Okay. Thank you, Derek. Councillor Natalie Hoy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say thank you to Sarah for this update. I'm delighted that the Mugger is going ahead on Clone Street. I've obviously been heavily involved in that with Matt Connolly and working with Leisure. I'm just aware of the 4,500 that still needs to be spent or at least allocated. We have been discussing at some length about the skate park. And it might be worth just bringing Steve Singleton in, who is the clerk to Clown Parish Council, just to discuss to make sure that these monies are allocated, because obviously we don't want to return in monies that could be spent on the community.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hoy. Yeah, as I said, we are now working with the leisure officer to look at that pocket of money that is potentially an underspend. So again, happy to engage with local ward members and the relevant members of the council as well, to make sure that we don't get in a position where we've got an underspend to be returned. So yeah, we will keep.
Please do keep me updated. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Anybody else? Any questions? Right. Well, there is a recommendation on page 68 at 6.1 that the planning committee note the report, and I'll move that from the chair. Does that receive a seconder? Been seconded in the chamber by Councillor McGregor. All those in favour, please indicate. That is unanimous, both in the chamber and online. We'll move on then to agenda item 8, which is a report on the local enforcement plan. And again, I will invite Sarah to present a brief summary of the report. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And just for Nikki again, there is a slide on the presentation, slide 30, with just a little bit more text to accompany the report itself. So the report's been prepared to set out progress on the local enforcement plan and the service targets that we set within the local enforcement plan specific to planning. And the data that's been presented to members in this particular report represents planning enforcement cases and activity between the 1st of July 2019 and the 30th of June 2020. It is intended as an information-only report, so I think a lot of the content in the report itself is relatively self-explanatory. But in terms of the local enforcement plan, that sets out how we will identify all unauthorised activity inquiries that are received by the planning enforcement team, and we will identify those and set them into high, medium and low priority cases. And respectively, that plan then sets out a targeted time limit for us undertaking the initial site visits and making contact in terms of these cases. The time limits are 24 hours for high priority cases, 2 weeks for medium priority cases, and 6 weeks for low priority cases. And you'll see in the report, the Principal Enforcement Officer has presented all of the enforcement cases on this reporting period and how we performed against those targets in a series of graphs that have been presented. We are showing good performance against the planned targets. Site visits for all 2019 and 2020 medium and high priority cases were undertaken in time, and there was only a very small margin of the low priority cases that weren't actually met within the timeframes. But I think I would hope members would support the fact that given we were in lockdown circumstances and because of COVID-19, I think we've actually performed incredibly well given the limitations that we faced this particular year. So I do believe that we are showing pretty good performance against the planned targets there. The enforcement team are operating effectively. We've got a team now of 4 full-time equivalent members of staff. Yep, again, hopefully the graphs that are shown show that we are actually fairly proactive in terms of closing cases and taking cases forward. and we don't have a particularly high proportion of older enforcement cases that are needing to be progressed. So of the higher priority cases that members will see in the report that's presented, there are 3 sites that have got notices to be served, and there are higher priority cases. Just to highlight those, there are sites at Market Street at South Normanton, Main Street at Shirebrook, and Markland Farm at Clown. And we are working through those cases in particular. So if there are any particular questions about those cases, please do come and ask the planning enforcement team to just for any particular updates. And again, I would advocate for all members that if there are any questions about the planning enforcement activity, the enforcement team, Richard Scott, Jonathan Gaynor and Sam Sidwell are available for contact in any particular queries about particular cases. So whilst we perhaps did hold off serving any notices during COVID-19 and the lockdown in particular, I think that we've got to sort of try and now carry on in terms of business as usual as much as we can, noting we are entering another period of lockdown. So we have the discretion in terms of serving notices and serving compliance periods that are commensurate with sort of the position we're faced with. So we will be sensitive to that in terms of officers. But again, just to advocate for members, if there are any questions, please do come and speak to us about it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, for your report. Are you just going to take the presentation off the screen, Nikki, so I can see everybody, please? Thank you. Are there any questions then to the report from anybody at all? No, I can't see you there. Just, I've got 2 in the chamber. I'll start with Councillor Liz Smith.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Liz Smith, Old Hucknall Ward. It's just about page 70 of this report. I'm just wondering what criteria you use for a high priority, a medium priority and a low priority, and what sort of examples there might be for those, please.
Gosh, I kind of feel like I've been put on the spot, and I actually don't know the answer. Is the honest one? I would have to refer us back to the actual local enforcement plan and the actual criteria. So can
Richard Scott's available. Richard could answer. He's there. He's there.
Hello,
so the principal enforcement officer is.
Can I refer, Richard, are you a participant in this meeting? Do you have a microphone? Are you able to contribute?
I am able to contribute.
Okay, you'll need to speak up. So if you don't mind, I'm going to invite Richard just to give us some background on the criteria for identifying levels of priority. Richard, over to you.
There's 3 different levels of priority, Councillor Liz. I'm in the department today. Why don't we have 5 minutes when you've finished the committee there and pop through? And that's just what we'll do.
Thank you. At any time, members, you are Officer Richard Scott, who is responsible to Sarah for the enforcement team, will always be more than willing to answer your questions either by email, or if you do come into the chamber, into the council offices, if he's present, he will give you whatever time you need. I have found him to be a most helpful officer. Right, I believe Chris Fridlington wishes to join in. Assistant Director responsible for planning, Chris Fridlington.
Thank you. Was the question just to double check how we've set priorities? Yeah, that's no problem. Just in brief, for the sake of all the committee really, high priority cases are the ones that will cause immediate and irreversible damage. So things like demolition of listed buildings, going into countryside, open countryside, greenbelt, stuff that needs immediate attention. Or there's some immediate risk of harm. So an outbreak of pollution is someone doing something where they're spilling stuff into the environment, into a river, or an activity is causing immediate harm. Medium priority cases are the ones that are contrary to policy and have got some significance about them. So it might be conversion of a barn to a dwelling in outside country, in an open countryside without permission. So they're the sorts of things that we wouldn't normally wish to permit, or have gone ahead unknowingly or whatever, but have planning consequences, but don't need immediate action to resolve them. If someone's converted a barn to a house and been living there for 3 months, then we wouldn't consider that to be an emergency in the same way we would do if perhaps someone came up and set up a, started building in a green belt and started to be digging up all the, so that's the difference between high and medium. Mediums are still serious cases, but no risk of immediate damage or harm. And then the low level ones, the low priority ones, are all the things like householders and all the very simple cases where someone's head fence might be 3 centimeters too high than it should be, or it's a shed in someone's back garden or a conservatory. Things that aren't causing immediate harm but need to be regularised or looked at. So that was a brief summary. I hope Richard agrees with that, incidentally. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris, for that clarification. Duncan, did you want to ask a question?
No, I just want to comment that on 2.1, page 77, which the officer conclusions are reading for recommendation, and absolutely support the line which says breaches of planning control are dealt with effectively and efficiently. It is also considered that the enforcement team is performing well against the service standards with regard to promptly visiting sites where cases have been reported to the planning service. The good team, they do this council proud as far as I can see. And I'll just refer you to 2.4. Members are reminded that a review of the local enforcement plan is due to take place before March 2022. With them comments, I'd like to move the report be noted.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor McGregor. Does that receive a seconder? Yes, it's been seconded in the chamber. Are there any further questions or points anybody wishes to make? No, in that case, Councillor Clark, Nick Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to concur with Councillor McGregor, and the dealings I've had with the enforcement team have always been positive and very helpful to me.
Thank you. Right, all those in favour that the report be noted, please indicate. That's unanimous, both in the chamber and remotely. That does conclude the agenda for today's meeting. But before you go, can I first of all place on record my thanks to every single officer who's been involved in preparing for this meeting and all the officers who've been in attendance and contributed to the meeting. It is a very onerous task at the moment in very difficult circumstances, and I think we're all very grateful to them for their support, and that includes the operators of the cameras in here and the people who work remotely. And finally, can I thank all members for their very helpful and informed contributions to this morning's agenda and to the various items on the agenda. Can I now also thank the public who might be observing us or might have followed us through the streaming of the meeting. Can I wish you all a very pleasant rest of the day. Thank you for your time, and now invite Martin to cease the live streaming. Thank you.